Good morning. I know you guys are getting reacquainted, and I hope you didn't have a problem getting over here this morning. I want to start by acknowledging a couple of people. Yesterday we had some board members. Some of them were able to be here. Some were listening in, I understand. But this morning we have one of our board members that I failed to acknowledge yesterday. And that's Dr. Michael Yang, who's way there in the back. He's been on our board for a while. Thanks for joining us this morning. Thank you. The other former board member is a college colleague of mine, and I got involved in this because of him. And we go back to like the early 1970s. We're really dating ourselves, Audie. That's Audie Chang right there in the back. That's Audie from New York. When I was coming back from my graduate program, he was graduating, so you can kind of figure out our age difference. It's pretty close, but yeah, you're younger than me, Audie, okay? I'll acknowledge that. So you need to pay me respect, okay? Anyway, thank you for getting me involved, Audie. The other person, we have had supporters over the years, and there's one person that, you saw that slide that Monica put up yesterday. We got a lot of different people involved in supporting us. And the president of one of the groups is here today, the president of the Association of Asian American Administrators in San Francisco, and that's Mimi Kasner. Mimi, wave. Thank you for joining us. The president of TAC, the Association of Chinese Teachers, could not be here. She's part of a workshop meeting with her board this morning. So anyway, I just want to make sure we acknowledge those individuals properly. When you left yesterday, I hope you had enough food for thought. Today, we're going to give you another healthy serving. We're going to put more on your plate to chew, and we have additional speakers. And again, it's something I have to say at the beginning for our organization, and the slide needs to go up, the disclaimer slide. You probably wonder, why the dickens are you doing this? This is because we are such a hot topic. China, US relations, all the controversial issues. We, as a nonprofit, non-political, non-partisan organization, cannot and must not and will not take a position as an organization. Individually, we have our own personal opinions. And as you can see, we invite a lot of different organizations and people and professors and people from the media. They have their point of view. So we cannot espouse and support a political viewpoint. Or, like I said yesterday, our mission is to educate. So that's why we have this disclaimer. And that should answer some questions people have. Why do you put that up? Well, that's the reason. So now I'm not going to take any more of your time because we're going to go back to our moderator, Clay, who really did a fabulous job yesterday. Let's thank him for yesterday. Okay, thank you, Clay. And I know he's going to, again, work his magic for us today. So, all yours, Clay.
Thank you. First of all, the reason Paul needed to make that statement is because he doesn't know what I'm going to say. He wants to make sure that they're covered. But no, the reality is that we deal with difficult issues all the time. And the 1990 Institute doesn't run from those issues, but embraces the discussion of them. But it's important to make clear that neither the 1990 Institute or the place that I represent, the USC US-China Institute, we are nonpartisan, non-ideological organizations. We don't serve any government. It's our mission to serve our audiences. And so that's what we try to do. And so right now there's a slide up that highlights some of the K through 12 teaching resources that are available at our website. Now, we don't have enough time to actually explore those resources this morning, but hopefully over time you'll go to the website and you'll explore around. One of the useful things, I think, for many people all across the country is that we have an educator's calendar which introduces events like this one. We post information about workshops that are held across the country. And our educator's calendar focuses not just on China, but on all of East Asia. because we think that most people teach these things in tandem, and so we try to serve that. One of the things that I think teachers will appreciate are the primary source documents. So various speeches, various declarations, treaties, those kinds of things. So for example, in the news last week, of course, was the passing of the Chinese dissident Liu Xiaobo. And we have some of his writings, but we also have the verdict against him, the verdict that sent him to jail for the last time. So you can read what the Chinese government accused him of doing, which was to try to overthrow China, the government of China. And so you can see those kinds of things and use those with your students. We also have an online discussion forum that has about 1,300 participating members, which is actually over the next month going to change dramatically, and hopefully it'll be even more user-friendly. And that's a place where teachers share lesson plans, they share links to resources that are important, and we'd like to encourage you to take advantage of that. In addition to the wealth of resources that are available at the 1990 Institute, this is something else that you can draw upon. And at the Institute itself, china.usc.edu, we've had a number of conferences focusing on issues, some of which we're touching on in this workshop and are appropriate for your use. So for example, we've got Eric Fish, who's going to be talking to us today about millennials. And a couple years ago, we had a conference focusing on millennial minds. And we did that in tandem with Fudan University in Shanghai. And so you got a sense of what was happening, a variety of presentations. China in the American political sphere, China's growing pains, those kinds of things. We have a student-driven publication called U.S.-China Today. You can see some of the things that they've looked at. One of my favorite recent articles is called Out China, and it deals with same-sex marriage and just recognition of LGBT issues in China. And it was put together, that was something that one of our students at USC authored. Actually, she began the project while she was still in China. So there's a lot there. I would encourage you to take advantage of it. Also, for those of you who are interested in the role of the media, we have a 12-part documentary series called Assignment China, which is essentially an oral history of the work of all the journalists, and we didn't get to interview all of them, but we have a representative sample from the 1940s to today. And this has proven to be very popular and very useful, and I'm glad that we initiated it some years ago and brought it to fruition, because several of the people are no longer with us. People who were reporting in the 40s, in the 50s, and the 60s, some of them, including people like Morley Safer for 60 Minutes and things like that, they have passed away. So take a look at Assignment China. One of the people who is featured in Assignment China is the spouse of one of our speakers today, okay? And I think she'll throw him a pitch too, okay? Based on his phenomenal work, first for a variety of different things. Actually, he worked for Kaiser Kuo at one point, but also the reporting he's done for Marketplace and NPR. So that's about the Institute. So take a look at that when you can. But my main task today is not to advertise the Institute and its wares, but to talk about the ground that we covered yesterday. And we covered a lot. And so I'll try and say something about that and tie it to what we're talking about the rest of today. So that's my task. It's got a green light. Did you do that? Can you click back? Yeah, this one's not. Okay. All right. So we began yesterday talking about Ilu, and hopefully you're all ready to sing the song. We're going to do it at lunch, and so you have to figure out which of the dance moves is yours. And so we'll cover that a little bit later. But this is, of course, the part of the propaganda that you'll see about it, where all kinds of good things are going to come from this. But as you heard yesterday, there's a lot of debate within China as to whether or not this is going to pan out for China. We wanted to emphasize that there are slogans associated with it, but there's an economic imperative. And this came up yesterday, and it's going to come up even more fully today as you learn more about the demographic transition that's underway in China today. They've reached peak labor, and so that's going to be a challenge. Also, there's a domestic political imperative. The idea is partly to mobilize state industry and to develop Western China, because there's tremendous income inequality and opportunity inequality across China. And so this is one way that they're trying to strengthen the economy of Western China, including predominantly minority areas in Xinjiang and in Tibet. So this is something about China's changing population. And we have a distinguished demographer who's going to be with us today. So I don't want to dwell on this, except to emphasize China is growing much more slowly than it did in the past. There are many fewer young people as a share of the population. You can see it's dropped in 2016 an estimated 17%. So it's been slipping. And that's part of the discussion of the one-child policy that Professor Tsai is going to be talking about later today. The other dynamic is while China is still a developing country, it's also becoming an old country. They're catching up with the United States in terms of median age, and they'll become an older country than the United States. We worry about caring for the elderly in this country. How are we going to do that? How are we going to manage it? Some of you are managing it yourself, right? You're in the sandwich generation, taking care of kids on the one hand and parents on the other. Now, one of the things that China's trying to do is, and I mentioned this last time, and these are some of the slides that are in the PowerPoint that you'll be able to access, is ramp up higher education. And so you see a tremendous expansion. When I taught in China, there were fewer college students in all of China than in the single state of California back in the early 1980s. You can see that expansion. And so there's been a big investment in millennials, and they're hoping that it'll pay off. Eric Fish is going to talk to you today about millennial mindsets, millennial challenges, and his book is a must-read. It's a terrific book. Now, one of the things from millennials, though, is that they have high expectations and rising expectations. And that's going to be a challenge. Because in their experience, this is what has happened in the Chinese economy. On a per capita basis, China's GDP has shot up. They've witnessed this. They've lived it. And so they don't necessarily, most millennials don't know about the poor past. They just have a more prosperous present, and they have expectations for a glorious future. So China is counting on millennials, and China has to worry about millennials, their expectations. Eric's the expert on this, and he'll be talking about it later. So, 28 years ago, or thereabouts, 27 years ago, I guess, I was living in the Chinese countryside, and this is what labor looked like, okay? This was transforming China, this low-tech, low-wage labor, which was still better than what? Agricultural work in terms of providing income to your family. And so this is what that looked like in the 1990s when China had a lot of young people that could go into these factories. Now you probably just heard this announcement that Foxconn, famous mostly for producing Apple products, is announced that it's going to build a big factory in Wisconsin, that sort of thing. Why? Because of this, there are too few workers in China, and they now want higher wages. And so China is now bringing in all kinds of robots. And in fact, Foxconn, the company that's famous, again, for this mass labor, these factories with 250,000 people, is buying robots. It's the #1 purchaser of robots. And so that's what's going on in labor today. So yesterday you heard, for example, from Professor Dong and from Matt Sheehan about this new economy, focusing on innovation, on increasing productivity, on delivering a better customer service environment. So for example, one of the things that was highlighted in that New York Times video is that you might make your appointment at the hospital through WeChat, that sort of thing. And so I've put up, again, a reminder about the New York Times video, but I'd like to encourage you at YouTube to look for a Discovery Channel video on WeChat. It's much better. It's much better. It's longer, and that allows them to do more, but it highlights something that Professor Dong highlighted. That's the social impact. And it gets at what made WeChat take off. And yesterday, when Monica was showing us those wonderful videos, including that one from, I think her name is Cecilia Hua, when she calls her grandmother, I don't know if anybody noticed, she was using WeChat. Okay, she was using WeChat. It's got that distinctive ring. And so that's the connection across the ocean, across generations that WeChat represents. And the Discovery Channel emphasizes that because typing Chinese is more of a problem than typing English, especially if you're older and you never learned Pinyin and things like that. And so this is really important. So you can look at how WeChat binds generations and things like that. The financial tech that was represented when you saw the person who paid for the services, including when Matt showed you the sweet potato salesperson, that sort of thing. That's a revolution. And when you're talking about how you build a China-centered economy, as you build out all this infrastructure, WeChat, Alipay, they're going along. And there's tremendous competition between these Chinese tech giants, between Tencent, which owns WeChat, and Alibaba, which has Taobao, Alipay, and these others. So this is an important consideration. This is one of the slides from Professor Dong, and I would really want you to focus on what the technology is doing within society. And he stressed, for example, how it empowers traditionally underserved populations, beginning with women. And so he emphasized that in his presentation. One of the things that's become more interesting, and to my mind sadder, is now the government is worried, for example, about Muslims in the Northwest, Uyghur, them becoming associated with fundamentalist movements outside of China and having those kinds of connections. And so they're compelling some of these people to load up apps that will allow the monitoring and the censoring of unapproved discussion. Again, that emphasis on social interaction. One of the things that really is important in China to understand is the migration from the countryside to the city. And Professor Tsai will talk about China now as being much more urban than it was decades ago. Now it's over 56% urban, and China's plan to develop is even greater. And things like WeChat and the technologies, these other technologies, have allowed people, before that just plain cell phones, allowed people to stay in touch over great distances. They might be laboring in a factory in the south, in Shenzhen, near Hong Kong, but they have family in Guangdong, or rather in Sichuan or Henan, linking things together. Now, I mentioned that East-West divide and how China wants to focus on developing these Western regions. One of the things to keep in mind is that until a few years ago, the overwhelming bulk of China's population, over 90%, lived on the eastern side of that line. But about 55% of the land was on the western side. And did it have consequences? Absolutely. Real consequences. Now, this statistic is a little bit dated. It's from 2000, and it's from a great book called The Atlas of China. And this shows, on the yellow side, life expectancy over 75 years. On the red side, under 70. What would you pay for an extra 5 years of life? Well, we know that in America, people pay an enormous amount to extend their lives. And they pay a lot of effort and money into extending their lives when they're young. These kinds of things. So this is something to focus on, tying this together. Now, this map is a satellite picture that shows us Asia. And if it were a little bit darker, you could see more clearly how much of Asia is dark, because they're not population centers, they may not be as economically developed. That's what the Belt and Road is about. Here we have a map of the Silicon Valley relationship that Matt Sheehan talked about with China, that slide. And one of the things that he emphasized was the rise of Alibaba and things like that. There's a great documentary called Crocodile in the Yangtze about Alibaba's rise. Now, it's a little bit of a propaganda piece. It was made by an Alibaba insider, but it's fantastic. So this is a corporate get-together.
They called him Crazy Jack.
Can you see why people think it's so much hot air? You don't make any money. You've got extraordinary...
I know you'd like to see the whole trailer or the whole film. Sorry about that. We don't have the time for it. But we're talking about, one of the things that Matt emphasized was the flow of money, ideas, technology across the ocean, linking the United States together with China, and his emphasis on Chinafornia. Remember that, right? Well, here's some evidence of that. Here's Chinese money coming to generate jobs in the United States, in California specifically, and in tech. The big dollar version is that middle picture. That's a $6 billion purchase of a technology logistics company. You have Riot Games, famous for League of Legends, purchased by the same company that brings you WeChat. And then on the bottom, you have a newer company called AppLovin that was just purchased for $1.4 billion by a Chinese private equity firm.
How would you?
Alibaba is now trying to purchase MoneyGram. This is something I mentioned yesterday. And so that's the extension of that financial technology into the United States.
How would you feel if a communist government like China tried to buy the New York Times or ABC News? We assume the United States would never allow that, and yet Chinese companies are buying up American film studios and movie theaters at an alarming rate.
So that's part of the pushback against Wanda and other Chinese investments in the American entertainment industry. This is something that was emphasized by Stan Rosen yesterday, the controversy associated with Wanda. But it goes to what Susan Shirk was talking about, a push for greater, what? Market access for American companies. Alibaba wants to buy a money transfer company in the United States. And yet, American companies have had trouble in financial services and other areas entering China. So that's some of what we talked about. And I just wanted to remind you of that and to try to connect some of it to where we're going now. So first, this is a Chinese poll. So it was carried out by a Chinese company, Horizon, Dataways Horizon, and they looked and asked Chinese, what do you worry about? Number one, corrupt officials. Number two, the rich-poor gap. And so you can see these different things. Working conditions was still significant, but not nearly as pressing as the rich-poor gap. And what? Safety of food, rising prices, safety of medicine. These are big, big issues. And some of that comes into play in all kinds of ways. And that's the subject of considerable discussion on the social media that was talked about yesterday.